So I'm really excited about this next guest, which is I'm kind of a nerdy fangirl from him, right? Because I worked for the electric co-ops for about 18 years. And he also worked for the electric co-ops on top of representing our state for many years. I'm not going to introduce him, though. I'm going to do one better and let Oklahoma Association of Electric Cooperatives introduce him because they are our keynote sponsor. So thank you, OAEC. I appreciate that. I also want to thank OEC and OEC Fiber for sponsoring this event, and Preservan, they have sponsored the event, so thank you very much. And the CFC, the Cooperative, oh Lord, it's all the initials. I just spaced. Yes, it's right behind me. The National Rural Utilities. Yes, Financial Cooperation. Oh my gosh. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Nikki Fuller now. She is the CEO of Oklahoma Association of Electric Cooperatives, and she will introduce our distinguished guest. So Nikki, come on up.
Thank you so much, Tori. It is such an honor to be here. Like you, I am also a fangirl of the cooperatives, and so to say I'm excited about this keynote speech is to undersell it significantly. So we are very happy to be here. It is an honor to be here today at the Oklahoma Historical Society. There is something meaningful about gathering in a place dedicated to preserving our past and learning about a movement that transformed our nation. As we reflect on the past and look to the future, we are energized about what lies ahead. As I look around this room, I see partners, leaders, and advocates who understand that our story, Oklahoma's story, is one of resilience, progress, and community. And nowhere is that more evident than in the story of the electric cooperatives. Nearly a century ago, much of rural Oklahoma sat in the dark. Investor utilities didn't see a business case to serve sparsely populated areas. But Oklahomans, like Oklahomans do, didn't wait. Neighbors came together and they formed cooperatives, not because it was easy, but because it was needed and it was the right thing to do. They built an electric system rooted in people, not profits. They built infrastructure where others wouldn't. And they created a model that still stands today, member-owned, locally governed, and deeply connected in the communities that we serve. That mission has not changed. Today, Oklahoma's electric cooperatives serve over 1 million Oklahomans across challenging and vast terrain in some of the most impoverished counties in the state. We keep the lights on through ice storms, tornadoes, wildfires, and everything in between that Oklahoma has to offer. But more importantly, we show up for our communities, our members, and for each other. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about poles and power lines. It's about people. It's about the people running a farming operation that depend on reliable electricity. It's about small businesses trying to grow in rural communities. It's about schools, hospitals, and the next generation of Oklahomans who deserve opportunity no matter where they live. And as we look ahead, the challenges are real. We're navigating increasing demand, evolving energy policies, cybersecurity risks, wildfire concerns, and the need to invest in infrastructure, all while keeping rates affordable for the people we serve. But if history has taught us anything, it's this. Cooperatives do not back down from a challenge. We meet them head on with innovation, collaboration, and a relentless commitment to doing what is right for our members. And that's why this moment is so important. Because we have with us someone who not only understands this mission, but has helped shape it on a national level, while never losing sight of his Oklahoma roots. It is my privilege to introduce a leader who has spent his career advocating for rural America, for electric cooperatives, and for the idea that communities, not markets, should shape our energy future. Please join me in welcoming a proud Oklahoman, a former member of Congress, and the former CEO of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, Glenn English.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Nikki, and you're very kind. Delighted to see some old friends and old staff members, and even an old T-shirt out there. My goodness sakes alive, that thing's got to be ancient. Oh, Glenn English put you in Congress. That is old. Anyway, I'm delighted to be back. Nice to be home, and good chance to renew some old acquaintances, and that is fun. So thank you all for coming. And certainly I appreciate the fact that we have relatives and friends here, as well as some people who are with the electric cooperatives. But before I go any further, those of you who may be able to remember back when we had that sign, Glenn English put you in Congress, way back there, that was many years ago. On our first campaign, we had a billboard, and the billboard had not just my picture on it, but also the picture of my wife, Jan. And Jan is with us. Jan, stand up and say hello to everybody. I'll tell you something about that particular campaign. When we won the election, we did a thank you tour, went around different parts of the district. And one of the stops that we made was in Medford. And we had a little coffees, and folks would come in and we say thank you very much and all that kind of stuff. And I had this rather elderly gentleman. At the time, he seemed like he's very elderly. Now he's probably younger than I was. Anyway, he came up to me and he said, I just want you to know one thing. I said, what was that? You never would have won that campaign if it hadn't been for your wife. Well, Jan overheard that, and she's never forgotten it. And so over 55 years, I've continued from time to time. That is brought up to me. So you understand how that works. Well, I want to talk about the program. And you're going to hear me reference the program from time to time. And what I'm talking about is more than just delivering electric power. Because if you go back and look at the entire electric co-op movement, this was about improving people's lives. Not just bringing electric power, it's about improving people's lives by any way you possibly could for a group of people nobody else wanted to help. Nobody else wanted to give them any kind of assistance. And as Nikki pointed out, I was the chief executive of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. A little bit about what that was and how it came into being. It's one of the largest associations in Washington. We had 750 employees. We did not have 750 lobbyists, if that's what you're wondering. That's not what it's about. In fact, we had fewer than 30 people that were connected with it. Most of the effort of the association was to bring benefits to employees of electric cooperatives. Provide them with health care, provide them with retirement. And we also had our own mutual fund, which is very highly rated. It was, in fact, it was about a $3 billion mutual fund at the time, there for the purposes to assist employees of electric cooperatives. And also, the association itself, of course, represented each of the states and all the 900 electric cooperatives around this country. In 47 states all around the country. And the association itself is there to basically provide them with support, with assistance. And those statewide, Nikki, are extremely important, because I can assure you that the political effort that we put forth in Washington, D.C. was made possible by the strength we had in each and every one of the statewide. So I always say, thank goodness for the statewide. We appreciate you. Y'all did a great job and fully enjoyed it. Now, when we talk about the program was made possible because of political power. And I'll give you some kind of example of that. There was a lot of discussion back in the 20s and 30s about bringing electric lights, turn the lights on in rural America. And we had a Republican senator up in Nebraska. He was quite vocal, did a great job, named Norris. Senator Norris was a heck of an advocate. And we elected a president in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt, who from time to time would go down to Warm Springs, Georgia, as did people who had polio, part of the rehabilitation of the waters that were therapeutic. And he took note of the fact that there weren't any lights in Warm Springs, Georgia. You had coal oil lanterns, or you had lighting of lanterns of other types. But he also took note of the fact that none of the farmers had any kind of lighting, and none of the benefits. And he decided to involve that electrification as a part of his New Deal program. And in 1935, through an executive order, he did just that. The Congress in 1936 passed the legislation creating the REA, Rural Electrification Administration. That was set up at that time. And the purpose was to make low-interest loans so that those cooperatives that Nikki was referring to could, in fact, build infrastructure and could provide electrification for all those people that were members. If you think about it, that's probably the greatest, most successful do-it-yourself project this country has ever seen. Because electric cooperatives today, the infrastructure they have in rural America, they have infrastructure in 75% of the territory of the United States. That infrastructure is only supported by about 12% of the population. So it is truly remarkable that they were able to go out, even with the assistance of the federal government, and build that infrastructure to turn the lights on. And also to recognize and understand that they were the owners of that cooperative. Each and every cooperative is not a business like any others. It is a business that's owned by the membership, the folks that are actually getting the service. They were the consumers. Those were the people who, in fact, owned that cooperative. And that's the reason each and every cooperative is a not-for-profit entity. It's not there to make a profit. And each year, or every 2 or 3 years, up to the local distribution cooperative, they may, in fact, return any money that's in excess of what they have needed to run that business. Now, that was in 1932. The other thing the REA did is establish standards. And the REA established a way in which you brought the cooperatives together. Everybody had to have the same kind of infrastructure, meet the same kind of requirements. So it was truly a new and rather radical idea. And there were a lot of folks in this country who didn't like it, particularly those even though the big power companies didn't want to spend the money to build the infrastructure to bring electric power to all these rural areas around the country, most of the land mass of the United States. They didn't want to do it, but they didn't want anybody else doing it either. And they certainly didn't want the federal government making loans to a group of farmers out there to do it themselves. And so they provided quite a bit of opposition, a lot of name calling take place. It's socialistic. These are a bunch of communists out there. And there's no way you can get a bunch of farmers that are going to be able to go out there and provide electric power for themselves. There's no way that's going to work. Well, it did work. It did work. It was a fantastic success. In fact, if you go through the life of the REA program and the loans that were made over that period to that group of farmers to build it themselves, the default rate was less than 1%. Less than 1% over all those years. So it was rather fantastic. Now, those farmers who formed up those cooperatives ran into a big problem at the beginning of World War II. In World War II, you had rationing. And of course, copper was something that was highly desirable as a part of the war effort. And so what they found when they'd come to town representing their individual cooperatives is they'd have to go see their congressman, and their congressman say, hey, you got all these other people that, are trying to fight for copper wire as well. And they got together down at the Willard Hotel. The Willard Hotel's on Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and the Capitol. In fact, they gathered in the bar of the Willard Hotels where they gathered. And commiserating the problems and ineffectiveness and how we can't get anything done. We can't get a portion of that electric allocation for our wiring to help us continue to build and repair our electric lines to deliver power to rural America. And that's when they came up with the idea, we've got to band together. We cannot stand as just individual cooperatives scattered around the country trying to come in and talk to our single congressman and get this thing done. And that's when they recognized and understood we've got to have political power. That's when the saying came into reality, when they said, if this program dies, it'll die in politics. And we've got to do something to make sure it doesn't die. They banded together, and that's how NRECA got formed. That's how statewide got formed. So, in fact, they could speak with one voice, and united across this country could bring that political power into becoming a reality, something that would sustain the program of improving the lives of rural people, the program that increased the worth of family farms because they had electric power. And that's what it was all about. I remember one of the first times walking in the doors of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. There was a picture there, a photograph. It was a photograph of board members during the board meeting. You have these, as you all know that are familiar with co-ops, they like to meet a lot. And so we'd have board meetings about 4 times a year. All 47 states would send representatives to the board meetings. But this particular picture was taken in 1959, maybe early 60, 59 most likely, at a board meeting. And they had this young fellow that was sitting there among those board members. And that young fella was John Kennedy. And he was attending the co-op board meeting because of the fact that he recognized if he was going to be the Democratic nominee in 1960, he had to have cooperative support. That's what he recognized, and that's what I understood when I saw that photograph. And of course, he did go ahead and become president. Well, in 1961, as President of the United States, John Kennedy came to the electric cooperatives, came to the head of NRECA, my predecessor, and said, we've got a problem in Latin America. And he said the problem we have is that Castro and Che Guevara in particular, he sent Che Guevara down into Latin America, into the rural areas to spread communism, to spread revolution. And we've got to do something to counter that. John Kennedy, understanding the fact that the miracle that's been brought about by electric cooperatives over the past 25 years of his existence of not only turning the lights on, but also making it possible for the economic well-being of all those people who own farms out there to be improved. Electricity made that possible. He said, we need you to transform that miracle into Latin America. We need you to help us fight communism. And what he was proposing is that we want to partner with rural electric cooperatives through the federal government, namely through the State Department, through the AID program, and to send you guys down there to show them how to build the infrastructure and how to energize their lines and bring lights to Latin America, the same way you did it here in rural America, in the United States. Well, needless to say, the Congress passed that legislation, made it possible, that partnership possible. And the bill signing took place the last 2 weeks of October in 1962. Any of you remember what was going on the last 2 weeks of October in 1962? That was in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Anyway, President Kennedy was meeting with his advisors with regard to what to do with the missiles in Cuba in the cabinet room, and had us brought over to the Oval Office, or not me, but the electric co-ops and our representatives. And the president did the bill signing in the Oval Office with those co-op leaders because he felt it was so important to underscore how much we need electrification. We need to improve the living standards of people in rural Latin America in order to fight communism. And we've had an international program ever since as a part of the overall program because of the political strength of electric cooperatives, because of what we had been able to do in this country to improve the lives of rural Americans. Let me underscore a little bit with regard to that political power I was talking about and how important it was. The people who were part of the co-op program, particularly those people who were managers and their directors, but the managers, they were political people. You know, they weren't engineers. They were political people. And I never will forget, Gary Clevenger and I, in Cordell, Oklahoma, the Kiowash Electric meetings that we would have down at the park once a year. They were big meetings. I mean, they took over the park in Cordell. And they would have entertainment, yes, as you do with most of the annual meetings now. But they also had a heavy dose of politics because each and every one of those people in 1950s and 60s were people who had been there when the lights came on. They had lived in the dark. They knew what it was like. And they knew what a tremendous benefit and gain they had received with that electrification. So when that manager got up and he started telling them, here's who our friends are, and he'd tell them, these are the people that are supporting us. These are people supporting our programs. I guarantee you those folks listened. And if someone was a particularly good supporter, he'd let them get up and say a few words an election year. But they determine that strictly on the basis who our friends are. Those are our friends, and we're going to stick with our friends. And that's the way this program survived and prospered and grown. And since that time, we have had assistance as far as the telephones, rural telephone service. That came into being through the electric cooperatives because we were assistant. And they got loans from the REA. And we had generation facilities. We found that instead of just buying power from the big power companies, we needed to build our own generation. And the REA provided the loans to make it possible for Bill Generation to supply electric cooperatives. You have that here in the state of Oklahoma. And certainly, whenever this country decided to move into telecommunications, we had the National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative established by electric cooperatives. CFC, you're mentioned here on the board, provide our own financing, provide our projects to assist in supporting our projects. All this is a part of a bigger program, not just providing electrification, but improving the quality of life. Improving the quality of life. The same thing that Jack Kennedy wanted in Latin America, we have been doing in rural America, and we're continuing to do in rural America. In 1994, when I was asked to come over with the electric cooperatives as a CEO. I'm the fourth CEO of NRECA. One of the things that I inquired about was that aspect. At that time, there was a good deal of discussion with the new Clinton administration that, in fact, they wanted a new health care program, a single-payer system. And the question was, could we take our health care system, the electric cooperatives had, and the benefits that we're providing? It was a not-for-profit. Could we take that not-for-profit healthcare system with a single-payer system, and could we, in fact, make that a part of any legislation moving forward so that each and every member of the electric cooperative program, every one of our consumer owners out there, would be able to enjoy low-cost health care, not-for-profit health care, and the great benefits that we had under our program at NRECA, one of the finest in the country. In fact, at that time, they used to, or a few years later, they used to talk about the gold standard. Remember hearing about the gold standard? Some of these programs got to go. Well, we had a gold standard. It was a great program, and I hope still is. As far as I know, it is. But that's the kind of thing where we could have made a transition as far as the quality of care for an awful lot of people, but it had to be single payer. The reason being that instead of having other companies come in and cherry pick individuals who want it and leaving us with those that, quite frankly, they didn't want, then obviously that would have skewed the whole actuarial tables. Great benefits. And I think we ought to also recognize the fact that as cooperatives move forward, and as we begin to look at ways in which we can improve the quality of life of people living in rural America, and particularly those people who are served by electric cooperatives, we've got to understand that the greatest growth that this country is experiencing is in territories served by electric cooperatives. Today we have cities like Atlanta. The suburbs in Atlanta are served all by cooperatives. And they're some of the biggest cooperatives in the country. Between Austin and San Antonio, served by a cooperative, one of the bigger cooperatives in the country. So we're not quite so rural anymore. And that's what makes it important to recognize and understand that this program is for the owners. Yes, it started out benefiting people in rural America. Yes, it raised the standards of people in rural America. But the potential that it has in benefiting the members of all these people who today live in co-op territory, can be served in co-op territory, we have the opportunity to do even greater things to provide them with economic benefits during these difficult times. So I'm excited as I watch what Oklahoma Electric Cooperatives as well as NRECA does in bringing forward new programs, new ways in which we can benefit the people that belong to electric cooperatives, that they're those members, on a not-for-profit basis. So it's a great program. It's done great deeds. It's been a tremendous success. It has, in fact, been one of the great success stories of the federal government's partnership, not only with regard to here domestically, but the AID program and the work that we've done internationally to help improve the lives and hopefully tamp down some of the frustrations that you find in other countries. When I left NRECA, at that particular time, we were in 13 countries, undeveloped third world countries, providing assistance in building the electric utility infrastructure. I don't know if this is true, but I've been told we had been into Vietnam before the Vietnam War really got going, particularly in the South Vietnam, that the infrastructure that the cooperatives participated in building in Vietnam was the infrastructure that neither side, North or South, destroyed. They all respected that, and they all understood the value of it, and nobody wanted to mess that up. So I'm hopeful that that story is true. I have every reason to think it is true, and it's something that I think that indicates the value of this program, this form of business, and certainly benefits this country both from a domestically and as far as our foreign policy is concerned. I understand that you want to do some Q&A on this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you want me to just lead it, or do you want to do something?
Woo! Who's got a question?
I'm curious, Congressman, your thoughts about what we're seeing in today's world, data centers. Any thoughts about that, the impact, maybe even the infrastructure, those kinds of things?
In fact, I was reading an article today about that. Data centers use a tremendous amount of power. And obviously, from the standpoint of electric cooperatives, the issue is going to be whether we provide the electric power and whether we can manage that without harming our individual consumers. I should point out that electric cooperatives serve overall the poorest portion of this country. If you've looked at some of the rural territory, an awful lot of people living in mobile housing, very little insulation. You get cold winters, hot summers, and obviously that's a tremendous amount of power that's being used. So that, I think, needs to be taken into consideration. And the way that this is being done today is, well, as I understand it, there's particular care and effort made by those who wanted to establish such a data center to move in without the local people being aware of it, acquiring the territory, acquiring the zoning ability, and that is a problem. And I think that's something that we have to face, and I'm sure each and every cooperative is looking at that aspect of, can we or can we not? I know we had the problem in the late 2011-12 era, in which you had an awful lot of electric cooperatives reach their capacity as far as the amount of generating power that they had, and they were having to buy power, and it was a good deal more expensive than what they were able to generate for themselves. So that raises some significant questions and issues. Yeah, you're talking about a major challenge. If, in fact, we're going to look at, after, as they used to talk about, the man at the end of the line. These days we say that the folks at the end of the line, not the man anymore. Folks at the end of the line, and that was the case.
We have one in the back.
Thank you. I was going to ask that same question. So I'll shift gears because so much of what you said today is so relevant to what's happening today. And in fact, I'll leave it to you whether you'd prefer to refer to things we can learn for our domestic economy, healthcare, whatever, from the co-ops, or answer in terms of foreign policy and in terms of what we benefited in terms of working with the world for so long and building on that to build strength.
Right.
Either way that you wanted to go on.
Well, I think probably try a little of all of it. The issue I think that you're faced with during these times, you've got to understand what a cooperatives are about. The difficulty that I had during the years that I was CEO of NRECA, we kept having people, particularly directors, that would come in and they kind of want to pull over like it's a for-profit business. They kind of want to pull this thing over and they want to treat it like it's not a unique economic entity in and of itself. And if you pull that back and you say, okay, what we're doing here, if you want to look at it, it's a very selfish thing. It's very selfish. If I'm a member of Electric Cooperative, which we are, Jan and I are down in South Carolina, I want you to know I want that electric cooperative doing everything they can to provide us power with the least amount of cost possible. I want our cooperative looking for ways in which they can benefit the people where we live. NRTC, I mentioned in passing with NRTC, the telecommunications effort, and much of the discussion that has taken place around then is the question of bringing Wi-Fi to rural America. And how can we do that? And how do we afford that? Well, we want Wi-Fi. We don't want just plain old Wi-Fi. We want high-speed Wi-Fi. We want the finest, fastest stuff that we can get. And I talked to the folks at Blue Ridge Electric Co-op, where we live, about that. And they were advancing that. Well, as soon as they started taking a look at it, then suddenly we had a bunch of companies that wanted to come in and decided maybe they wanted to provide Wi-Fi to us. But that's, the thing about it is that there are all kinds of services and benefits that electric cooperatives should be offering if, in fact, they have the chance to do so. And it could cover a lot of different fields under certain conditions, because economically it has to be something that makes sense. They had something called retail wheeling. Everybody ever heard of retail wheeling? Okay, retail wheeling is competition. And so basically everybody can compete. And when they first started talking about doing this in California, Nikki, but years and years ago, we got kind of interested in it. We said, well, heck, we got some co-ops in Arizona as well as California. And if they want to get into the retail wheeling business, maybe we could take our generation in Arizona that we had and sell power to newly established cooperatives in California. We, in fact, developed a brand new cooperative in 2002 in Kauai, in Hawaii, the Kauai Island, mainly because they had an investor-owned utility that was providing electric power, and that utility wanted out. And so we went in and helped them establish a cooperative. And today, they are one of our new states, 47th state, that's a member of the cooperative family. This is about us. It's about what can we do for ourselves. It's about recognizing and understanding not everyone is going to do it for us. Not everyone is going to do it in a beneficial way. Not everyone is going to avoid taking advantage of us or look after us. With an electric cooperative, you've got political power. With electric cooperative, you've got the ability to use that entity and that infrastructure in delivering services that would be of benefit to the local people. It's something different, something unique. It is a consumer program. And those are the folks that we need to pay attention to, is to make sure that the people that are served by those electric cooperatives understand they have the ability to do a great deal for themselves if they work together, if it makes economic sense, if in fact it is need that's truly, that we need, that is needed by all. We can do that. So if it's a very powerful tool, something I've been very excited about. Ever since I went down to that park in Cordell when I was a teenager and watched those annual meetings, and all those folks turning out, and they were believers. And they exercised their power. And I'd see these guys coming around, elected officials coming around, or candidates for office coming around, and they were ready to make some pretty strong pledges to those members that they could be counted on to support them once they were elected to office. And most of them did. Most of them did. I entered Congress just as a lot of those folks who were there, not only when the lights came on, but a lot of those folks who got elected as a result of that in the 1930s and 40s. And they were retiring about that time. We had a new group come in. Didn't have the same appreciation. Didn't have the same appreciation. So I've always thought we could look and see what is it that we could do for ourselves. What new approach can we take to provide ourselves not with just electric power, with additional benefits by banding together and using that cooperative mechanism that is still there today.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Piggybacking right on that, those cooperative mechanisms, do you have any advice for people that want to take that model and start co-ops that are, besides electric, providing, different services for, providing services or commodities or utilities besides electric? Do you have people that maybe want to start their own co-ops? Do you have advice, warnings, best principles or practices?
Sure. I mean, the bottom line is it's just a question if you got critical mass. How many folks have you got that are really interested in this? How many folks have you got that are willing to band together and support each other? If it's, like I said, I felt pretty confident. I never did take it to the board, but I was very confident that if the Clinton administration had been successful in going with a single payer system, I was pretty confident that we could take the services we were already providing, because we already had claim center, we had it all, and provide that not for everybody, but only for those people that are members of electric cooperatives, only for those people, because it's for us. We're banding together, we're doing the work, we're making this possible, and I think we could have delivered a heck of a service, but it works for anything. But it depends upon the people that cooperate. That self-governance thing, what this country, really what our country, the framework this country is supposed to operate on. If you think about an electric cooperative, it operates the same way. I mean, the members, they elect their board members, their representatives, their Congress, if you want to look at it that way. And that Congress then, or those board members, then they hire the manager. And so it's a grassroots up type of endeavor. But we become so used to these things, it becomes old hat, and you kind of lose it, as to what it is. People lose track of it. So today, we don't have the same kind of understanding and recognition about how powerful this entity is that the people back at Kiowash Electric did in the 1950s at an annual meeting. They understood it, and they made it work. Yes.
Talk about the number of co-ops in Oklahoma and how, if they're all still viable and how that's going.
We've had, Nikki's one better to respond to that.
Sure. Yeah, we have 3 what's called generation and transmission cooperatives. So they're the ones that own the generation and the large transmission. And we have 27 distribution co-ops across the state. We've had a few consolidate with one another, like he's talking about Kiowash, Caddo and Kiowash consolidated a while ago. But other than that, they are all very viable and thriving.
Are the bigs like AEP, do they still clash like when you were trying to get started originally, or Nate?
Yes. We're all the utility industry, and so we all try to get along where we can, but there are certainly territory disputes, and we just do different business differently. And so therefore that's going to cause some issues. And I did want to, while I have the mic, just address one component of that. There was a question about data centers, and that is such a hot topic right now. And I just want to say that, we as the entire state of Oklahoma have made the commitment as co-ops and really across the nation that we will not take on a data center unless we are absolutely certain that it will have no effects on our members, because our priority is our members. First and foremost, we have to live in the community that we're serving. We don't get to put a data center in Western Oklahoma and live in Tulsa. We live in the communities. We are governed by people who are elected from the community, and therefore we have absolutely committed and we've written articles about it, and that we will not do a data center unless it has no effect on our members, unless it's a positive effect.
What would that look like for a data center to become a member? Would it just have one share like everyone else, or?
Yes.
That's right.
If they wanted to, yeah. I mean, traditionally, what it would probably be is a whole separate. Yes, they'd be a member. They'd be on a completely separate rate system. It's called a tariff, and so that tariff would look completely different than everybody else's tariff, and anything that was associated it, whether it be transmission costs, generation costs, or anything else, would be contained in that tariff.
And let me put a little sharper point on one Nikki was making, a very important fact. And this comes down to the fact that this is not like Nikki or your local co-op manager or even the board members going out and doing all this fighting. This is a membership thing. And if you're going to have one of these data centers and they're short on power, there's nothing that's going to happen except your rates are going up. And they may go up considerably. It's not just a question of not having enough power, but your rates are going to go up because they're going to have to go out and buy that power. And so this is something that the responsibility as well as the opportunity, as we do with citizens in this country, each and every citizen has a responsibility for our country. You know, everybody likes to sit back and say, well, if Joe Blow were here, representative, why, if he'd done such and such, and, you know, and sit there and grumble about it. You got to get involved. And this is the case. Electric cooperatives built on the same principle. So if you're fighting a fight like that and your co-op's taking this on and the co-ops in the state, then everybody better get in the act, because it's going to affect you and it's going to affect your pocketbook, and they've got to have your help. They need your political strength. Yes.
What's the primary power source of the electricity in general of the co-op?
Overall, as far as the amount of power that's generated by these generation and transmission entities that I think, if I remember correctly, they started making loans on that in the late 60s. Last I remember, is around 60% of the power, depending on the state, about 60% of the power that they have, they generate themselves.
From?
Well, some of it's coal, some of it's gas, some of it, you know. And in this part of the country, it's big time renewables. Big time renewables.
The last time I checked, I think we were like 35% renewable at OEC, but I think that's kind of statewide. We've got a lot of renewables.
We do on the Easter path
No, we-
or gas.
And we're building gas. Everybody's building. It's primarily gas right now. The middle has some more renewables, and then the west have more renewables, just given their proximity to wind facilities primarily.
What about the rest of the country, though?
Rest of the country varies. It's a crapshoot all the way through. Let me hit a couple of very important points, because what you're raising, I think, is of great interest. We have shifted. In the 1970s, REA, well, at that time, we had still REA at that time. REA would not make a loan to a co-op for building generation, or a group of co-ops to build generation, unless they partnered with an investor-owned utility and went nuclear. That was the whole thing. Everything was nuclear. You're not going to need, it's going to be so cheap on power. We're going to have so much power. We got to go nuclear. And that was the thing. Well, that was great up until 3 Mile Island. And that put the kibosh on that. Then suddenly the regulations went up as far as what had to be done. The cost of nuclear power went out of sight. Plus the fact with building a nuke plant, you got to collect the money in advance, not with the rates. It's got to be done in advance, because you got to have that money to be able to build it. Okay, the second thing happened. Okay, since we couldn't use nuclear, then the next thing, we had to build coal, because we got all this coal here, so we have coal plants. And then, so that was the trend of the federal government at that point. Well, let's build all these coal plants. And they did, all through 80s and then the 90s. Then we got into that. And then we got into the whole question with regard to air quality. And then it was gas, and that's what they're trying to kind of bridge with, is gas and renewables. And of course, that depended on what part of the country you're in as to how viable the whole renewable thing is. But there's a huge, big problem that we're not doing anything about. And it comes around by state government. And that is the question of transmission. They talk about the grid. There is no such thing as the grid. What you have is a lot of local and some regional transmission within the states. And it is up to the states to make the determination as to what the requirements are going to be able to connect with other states. And that gets to be a heck of a problem. We don't have nearly enough transmission, and what we have is inefficient, and it's old, and it needs to be refurbished. And that's something that is exacerbating this whole problem about how we get power, enough power, and how do we get it to the right place.
Thank you. So I just wanted to tell you guys that I had somewhat an ulterior motive to inviting Mr. English out here. Besides coming from the co-op world and having a true love for the cooperative business model, co-ops in Oklahoma, well, not nationwide, they're about to hit their 100 anniversary, in 2035. And you guys are a bunch of historians out there. That's always a good number. As we see with Route 66 and America 250. And I just wanted to encourage the historians out there to maybe look at the cooperative history. And partially because it's not just electric cooperatives. Cooperatives are, they serve all kinds of things. Like he said, the point of a cooperative is to improve standard of life. And that's kind of, we don't necessarily improve the standard of life here at the Historical Center, but we champion it, right? We celebrate those moments that we've had throughout the years. And I remember when, I don't remember when the grain co-op went in my great-granddad's town, because I wasn't born yet. But, they had, back in the days, let me just back up. We watched a video here. OETA comes in here, and they had programs. And our state, I'm sorry, my voice sounds like it's cracking. I hope you guys are okay with that. Our state historian, Matthew Pierce, helped out with this video about the Green Corn Rebellion. Did anybody come and see that? Or it was really fascinating, and it was like this whole progressive movement in Oklahoma. And I realized that was right around the same time that co-ops were taking hold in the rural areas. And I'm talking about ag co-ops, grain co-ops. And there was a co-op in my family's town of Willow, Oklahoma, which is southwest Oklahoma. And my great-granddad was so proud of that. He was a member, and he would never leave the co-op. And then, the 80s hit, and, farms started selling. People started thinking that they were doing okay, and they didn't need all the hassle of handling their own co-op. Because like Mr. English said, it takes some work. And the co-op got bought up. The members of the co-op voted to give up their co-op and sell it to a private entity. And it wasn't a decade before you saw farms failing. Farmers couldn't make the money that they were making when they were the owners of their grain co-op. And that's what, it's about the people, right? I would love to learn why, right? Like all those trends. Anyway, I could go on, and we could. If you guys ever want to take me to lunch, we'll go on and on. I love this topic, but it's about the people that I like hearing about and why they made the certain decisions and all of that. So anyway, just food for thought, something that you can think about. Thank you very, very much for coming.
I appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you for having us. Thanks.